I wasn't supposed to hear it, but my own son forgot to hang up. His voice cut through the phone like a blade. We'll move him to a care home and sell the house should fetch close to $1 million. My knees went weak. The boy I raised in the church pew every Sunday, the man I worked 2 jobs to educate, was planning to throw me away like trash. In that moment, something inside me broke, and then it hardened. Before this is over, they'll learn exactly who they underestimated. Subscribe for more stories like mine and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I stood in the middle of the living room, the phone still warm in my hand, my heart thudding like a hammer behind my ribs. The silence that followed his words wasn't peaceful. It was punishment. The house felt larger than it ever had, every shadow whispering a memory I wasn't ready to face. Lena's picture hung above the fireplace, her smile frozen in the frame. That same smile she used to flash across the church parking lot after Sunday service when the choir sang her favorite hymn. She'd always carry a dish of her cornbread wrapped in foil still steaming, and the neighbors would wave as the smell drifted down the block. Back then, our home wasn't just a building. It was a heartbeat of this street, a place where kids played tag until the streetlights came on, where men grilled ribs on the 4th of July, and where Lena made everyone feel like family. Now the only sound was the clock ticking above the mantel, slow and heavy. I looked at the worn groove on the arm of the recliner where she used to rest her elbow during late-night shows, humming softly under her breath. I could still hear her laughter in this room, light and easy, the kind that made everything else fade. But the laughter was gone, and the air smelled like old wood and dust. Her scent, vanilla and shea butter, had long faded from the curtains. I felt her absence more than I felt my own breath. I walked into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing too loud on the tile. The counter was still lined with her favorite spice jars, labels, peeling the little ones from the farmer's market she loved. I ran my fingers across the counter and felt a layer of dust. She would have never let that slide. I remembered how she used to call me from the doorway telling me to wash up before supper, how she'd laugh when I stole a piece of chicken straight from the pan. We didn't have much back then, but we had each other, and that was enough to make this house feel rich. I opened the fridge and stared at the empty shelves. There used to be leftovers wrapped neatly in foil jars of sweet tea, the kind she brewed strong and sweet enough to taste like home. Now there was nothing but cold air and the low hum of the motor. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. That's when it hit me. Not just the betrayal, but the loneliness that had been waiting quietly in the corners all along. My son Marcus used to run through this very hallway in his church shoes, tracking dirt from the yard. I'd scold him, but Lena would just laugh, wipe his face, and say, "He's just full of life, baby. Let him run." She was the warmth between us. Without her, the house had cooled, and so had Marcus. I thought I'd done right by him, kept him in school, paid for his books, taught him to stand tall. But somewhere along the way, money and pride had replaced love and faith. I walked to the back porch. The sun was sliding behind the neighbor's roof, painting the sky in soft orange and violet. The swing creaked when I sat down. Lena's cushion was still beside me, a little faded, the pattern worn from years of weather, and her Sunday dresses. I stared out over the yard we'd tended together, the rose bushes we planted for our anniversary now wilted and brown. She'd talk to them like they were people. "Grow strong," she'd say, "the Lord watches everything that blooms." I felt the burn rise in my chest, the kind that no prayer could quiet. My son called me a burden. A burden. After every overtime shift, every calloused hand, every night I spent praying over him, he saw me as a problem to be solved, not a man to be honored. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, but the words were too clear, too sharp. I could still hear Tanya's voice whispering about the sale price, as if my life's work was just a number on a piece of paper. I stood up, gripping the railing, and the wood groaned under my hand. I remembered how Lena would lean against it on warm evenings, calling to the kids down the street, her voice blending with the hum of cicadas. Back then, this neighborhood was alive music, spilling from open windows, the smell of barbecue and fresh rain. We watched folks grow old here, watched their children marry and move, and even buried a few friends together. It wasn't just home. It was a piece of history. and now my own son was ready to erase it. Inside, the light dimmed to amber as the sun dipped away. I walked down the hall to our old bedroom. Her side of the dresser was still covered in trinkets, a church program from her last Easter service, a bottle of her perfume half used, and the little silver cross she always wore. I picked it up and pressed it to my palm until it hurt. "You'd know what to say, Lena," I whispered. "You'd tell me to keep my faith, to let the Lord handle it. But even faith needs a hand sometimes." The night came fast, pulling shadows through the window panes. I turned on the old lamp in the corner. The bulb flickered before steadying, throwing a soft light over the room. I looked at myself in the mirror, an old man, shoulders bowed, eyes heavy, but not broken. Not yet. The betrayal hurt, yes, but beneath that pain was something else stirring. Not rage, not sorrow, clarity. I could feel it like the quiet before a storm. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I walked back to the living room and sat in Lena's chair. The air was still, the world outside silent, but for the distant rumble of a train. I thought about what this house had seen: weddings, birthdays, laughter, and loss. And I thought about what it might see next. Marcus thought he could decide my fate. He thought age made me weak. But he forgot who built these walls with his bare hands, who carried this family through every storm. I leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling where faint water stains shaped like clouds stretched across the plaster. "You forgot to hang up, son," I murmured, the words slow and deliberate. But I heard everything. The anger in my chest turned cold, like steel cooling after fire. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg. I had something stronger than fury. I had time. I rose, crossed the room, and opened the desk drawer. Inside was the deed to the house, the same one Lena and I signed 35 years ago. Her signature still looped neatly beside mine. I traced it with my thumb and felt her presence in the ink. That paper was more than proof of ownership, it was proof of survival, of the life we built from sweat and grace. And I knew right then what I had to do. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows over the porch. The air smelled faintly of rain, and somewhere down the block a radio played soft blues, a voice rich and low singing about heartache and faith. I closed the curtains and took a deep breath. Marcus had made his move. Now it was my turn. And when I tell you what happened next, you'll understand why I never answered his call again. I sat at the old dining table, the one with the scar down the middle, where Marcus dropped a wrench years ago while helping me fix the ceiling fan. I kept meaning to sand it out, but Lena said it gave the table character. The house was too quiet, and quiet like this does something cruel. It makes memories louder. I reached for the storage box under the window seat, the one I hadn't opened since she passed. Dust clung to my fingers as I lifted the lid, and the smell of old paper and cedar rushed out like a sigh from the past. Inside were the years I'd given away, one folded receipt at a time. The first thing I found was a stack of envelopes tied with blue string. Each one had a note written in my handwriting. Marcus tuition payment number 1. Marcus tuition payment number 2. All the way through 4 years of college. I'd worked double shifts at the construction yard, taking whatever job I could get, even when my knees ached from the cold. There were nights I came home too tired to eat, but I still dropped every spare dollar into that envelope. He used to call me every Sunday night from the dorm, his voice full of excitement, telling me about some new project or professor who saw potential in him. I believed it then that all those sleepless nights were worth it. Beneath the receipts was an old photo, corners curled. Me, Marcus, and Lena standing in front of his first car, a dented blue Buick we bought secondhand from a church member. He was 16, grinning ear to ear, one arm around his mama. That down payment had come straight out of the fund Lena and I started for home repairs, but she said, "Let the boy have a start, baby. The Lord will provide." And I believed her. We both did. I flipped through the rest bank slips, tithing records from the church donation letters for the youth center fund we helped build. I remembered standing with Pastor Green under that same half-finished roof one hot August afternoon. Sweat ran down my back, mixing with sawdust, while Lena handed out lemonade to the volunteers. Marcus was there too, hammer in hand, pretending to complain while laughing with his friends. We called it the Renewal Project, a place for kids who didn't have much but needed somewhere to belong. I thought those days meant something to him. I thought they'd taught him what community looked like, what faith felt like when it had dirt under its nails. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the boy he once was, the one who used to sneak into our room after nightmares, who clung to my arm during Sunday service when the choir got too loud. That boy used to look up at me like I was the whole world. When did that change? When did I stop being his father and start being his obstacle? The papers blurred. My throat tightened. I wasn't ashamed of the sacrifices. I'd make them again if I had to, but what broke me was realizing they meant nothing to him now. Not one gesture, not one late-night shift, not one prayer whispered over his name before dawn had stayed with him. He'd traded gratitude for greed, and I couldn't figure out when he stopped seeing the difference. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath my weight. On the wall above me was the old framed certificate from the construction company where I'd worked 32 years. Employee of the Year 1998. Lena had been so proud she brought the whole choir over for cake that night. I smiled at the memory, but the smile didn't last long. That plaque, those receipts, they were proof of a life built from the ground up. And now my own son wanted to erase it all with a single sail. The kitchen clock ticked louder. I could hear the wind picking up outside, whistling through the cracked window pane. I got up and walked down the hall to Marcus's old room. It still smelled faintly of old cologne and laundry soap, the ghost of a younger version of him. The trophies from high school basketball sat crooked on the shelf, dusty but untouched. I ran my thumb across one, feeling the grit. I remembered the way he used to run into the bleachers after a win, shouting, "Did you see that, Dad?" His joy was pure, then bright as a sunrise. I thought of that boy when I paid his tuition, when I covered his debts, when I helped him buy his first home with Tanya. I thought love would bring him back. I thought love would be enough. I sat on the edge of his old bed and picked up a Bible from the nightstand. The spine was cracked, pages yellowed from age. Inside the cover I'd written a note when he graduated college. Always remember who you are and where you come from. I stared at those words until they blurred. Maybe he'd stopped reading them the moment he left this house. Maybe he'd stopped believing them too. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, throwing orange streaks across the floorboards. I could hear faint laughter from down the block, neighbors gathering for a barbecue, or maybe just sitting on porches like we used to. That used to be us. Every Sunday evening after church, we'd host half the neighborhood out back. Lena would serve sweet tea and potato salad, and I'd man the grill. We'd sing old hymns when the night cooled, Marcus playing around with the other kids, everyone shouting over each other's stories. It wasn't fancy, but it was love. It was family. It was the kind of life you build brick by brick, believing it'll last. Now I was the only one left to remember. The house felt smaller somehow, as if time itself was closing in around me. I put the box back under the window seat and stood in the dark, letting the quiet press against me. Pain doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it's just a heaviness that sits in your bones. I'd given everything to my son, and somehow that had made him blind to what it cost. I turned off the light and walked back toward the living room, my reflection catching briefly in the hallway mirror. I didn't look like the man I used to be. There were lines where laughter once lived, gray, where there'd been black, and a stillness in my eyes I didn't recognize. But beneath that stillness was something harder, sharper. All those years I thought sacrifice was what defined love. I thought giving everything was proof of devotion. But love without gratitude becomes a chain, and I was done wearing it. Marcus thought my years made me weak, but he forgot who taught him to fight, who taught him to pray, who built the roof over his head with hands that never stopped working. I looked once more at Lena's picture on the mantel. Her smile seemed different now, wiser, maybe even approving. I felt a calm spread through me, slow and steady, like the deep breath before a hard day's work. The betrayal had burned away something inside me, but what was left wasn't ruin. It was purpose. I walked to the front window and drew the curtain aside. The sky had turned the color of ash and rain began to fall, tapping softly against the glass. I stood there for a long time watching the drops gather and run down in thin silver lines. Each one felt like a reckoning washing away whatever weakness I had left. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this much: I wasn't finished. Not with Marcus, not with this house, not with the life I'd built. And when I opened that drawer again and found what I did, everything changed. The next morning the rain hadn't stopped. It fell steady and thin, whispering against the windows like a reminder that something was shifting. I stood by the kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee cooling in my hand, watching the street glisten under the gray light. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that hurts. This was different, focused, heavy with thought. I hadn't slept much. My mind had been moving all night, retracing every word my son had said every time I'd let something slide in the name of peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace, it's surrender. I set the cup down and walked to the study. The air there smelled of old wood and paper, faintly of the lemon polish Lena used to wipe the shelves with. The desk drawer resisted when I pulled it open, the wood swollen from years of humidity. Inside lay a folder I hadn't touched in decades, our house deed, tax papers, insurance forms. I sat down and spread them out under the lamplight, tracing my finger along the signatures. Mine, Lena's, no one else's. My name was written in thick black ink, steady and sure. Seeing it there, undeniable, unbroken, felt like a breath I'd been holding too long. I remembered that day like it was yesterday. We stood in this same room, fresh paint still wet on the walls, the smell of pine from the new floors filling the air. Lena had been radiant, her hair pulled back with that white ribbon she wore when she wanted to feel special. She pressed the pen into my hand and said, "Go on, baby. Sign it. This is our legacy." Her voice had that certainty I'd always trusted, the kind that could part clouds. I signed, she kissed the page, and we prayed over that deed like it was scripture. Now, years later, her words came back clear as church bells. Don't let anyone take what we worked for. I ran my hand over the page, feeling the grooves of the ink like they were carved into me. All the guilt, all the heartbreak, all the humiliation from hearing Marcus's voice plotting against me, it started to shift into something cleaner, sharper. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't done. Lena used to tell me that faith without action was just hope, pretending to work. Maybe it was time I stopped hoping and started moving. I closed the folder, stood up, and looked around the room. The photographs on the wall, the wedding day, Marcus's graduation, the church picnic from '99, looked back at me like witnesses. I walked over to the window and stared out at the yard. The rain had eased and the grass shone dark and wet. The rose bushes bowed low under the weight of water. The world felt washed, reset. I thought about the years Lena and I spent saving for this house. How we'd eaten beans and rice 3 nights a week just to make that down payment. How we'd worked overtime, turned down vacations, and still managed to give back to the church when others would have called it foolish. Every nail, every board in these walls was bought with faith and calloused hands. And now my son thought he could cash it in like it was just another transaction. I went to the living room and opened the cabinet beside the fireplace. Inside was an old metal box, my life's paperwork. I pulled out the bank statements, my savings, my retirement fund, the insurance policy. Enough to live quietly if I played my cards right. Enough to make moves without anyone knowing. I picked up Lena's picture from the mantel. She was smiling like she always did when she knew something I didn't. "You'd tell me to keep my head high," I murmured. "You'd say dignity don't fade with age." Her eyes seemed to follow me as I paced the room, my thoughts growing clearer. All my life I'd been a builder of houses, of a family, of a reputation that meant something in this community. Builders don't crumble, they reinforce. And I'd be damned if I let what I built get torn down by greed. I thought of calling Marcus, just to hear his voice, to see if guilt would show up in it. But then I remembered the tone he used that day, casual, cold, confident. No, this wasn't the time for confrontation. This was the time for precision, the time for quiet preparation. The old wall clock struck 10, the sound echoing through the empty house. I felt something inside me settle like a foundation finally drying after a long rain. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The sky was breaking open, thin rays of sun slicing through the clouds. The air smelled clean the way it does after a storm, the kind of clean that makes you think maybe the world's giving you one last chance to do things right. I walked down the street toward town, my steps steady, my mind clear. The bank sat on the corner near the old diner where Lena and I used to get breakfast after Sunday service. I nodded to the teller, a young man who'd grown up down the block. "Morning, Mr. Harris," he said. I smiled faintly. "Morning, son. I need to check on a few accounts." I didn't tell him much, just enough to make sure everything was in order, that the paperwork matched the names I wanted it to. When I walked back out into the sunlight, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but free from the fog I'd been living in. Back home, I took off my coat and hung it by the door. The smell of rain still lingered inside, but it didn't feel like decay anymore. It felt like cleansing. I walked through each room slowly, my hand brushing along the walls. Every dent, every scratch told a story, stories of hard work, love, and survival. I whispered a promise to Lena and to myself. No one's taking this from me. Not while I'm still breathing. I went into the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. The light slanted through the window, now catching the dust in golden streaks. I sat down, took a long sip, and let the heat settle into me. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast and leaves nothing. What I felt was steadier resolve, pure and simple. I wasn't the man Marcus thought I was. I wasn't frail or confused or fading. I was the man who built this home from the dirt, who survived losses that would have broken lesser souls. I still had my hands, my mind, and a will sharper than ever. I folded the deed carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. It felt right there, close to my chest, like armor. When I looked out the window again, the clouds were parting completely. Sunlight pouring over the neighborhood. Kids were riding bikes down the street, laughter echoing between houses. For a moment, it felt like the old days, before money, before betrayal, before the silence. I leaned against the frame, feeling the warmth on my skin. The pain was still there, yes, but it had turned into something else. Purpose. I wasn't going to wait for my son to decide my fate. I wasn't going to let pity define me. I had a plan forming piece by piece, just like a blueprint in my mind. Every step measured, every move deliberate. I'd built entire lives with less to go on. And when the time came, Marcus would learn the same lesson I taught him when he was a boy helping me in the yard. Measure twice, cut once, and never forget who built the foundation beneath your feet. And what I did next would make sure he never forgot again. By the next afternoon, the air had turned sharp with the promise of another storm. The clouds over the church parking lot looked heavy, like they were holding their breath. I parked my old Chevy under the oak tree where Lena and I used to wait for the choir to finish rehearsing. The brick building hadn't changed much, same faded sign, same white cross catching what little sunlight managed to break through. But walking inside felt different now. I wasn't here for worship or comfort. I was here for strategy. Mr. Jefferson's office sat behind the church, tucked into what used to be the choir's old storage room. It smelled faintly of old hymn books and lemon cleaner. A small fan hummed in the corner, pushing warm air around. Jefferson looked up from a stack of papers as I stepped in. He hadn't aged much, just more gray at the temples, same calm eyes that used to catch every detail during Bible study. "Well, look who finally came to see me," he said with that slow, knowing smile. "Sit down, brother. I was starting to think you'd forgotten how to ask for help." I chuckled, but it came out hollow. "I'm too old for pride, but not too old for payback." He raised an eyebrow, motioning toward the chair across from him. "That sounds like trouble brewing." "Not trouble," I said, lowering myself into the seat. "Correction." Jefferson leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. "All right. Tell me what's been going on." So I did. Every word of it. The phone call I overheard the betrayal, the plan to sell the house that Lena and I built. I watched his expression shift, first disbelief, then disappointment, then something colder. When I finished, the room was quiet except for the hum of the fan and the faint creak of his chair as he leaned forward. "Let me see the papers," he said. I reached into my coat and pulled out the folder I'd been guarding like scripture. The deed, the tax receipts, the insurance, all of it. He took his time reading line by line, adjusting his glasses. The only sound was the scrape of his pen as he made notes on a yellow pad. After a few minutes, he looked up, eyes steady. "This house is yours, brother. No one, and I mean no one, can take it unless you say so." The words hit me like a gospel note ringing through a quiet church. I felt something ease inside me, something that had been locked tight since the moment I heard Marcus's voice plotting against me. Jefferson poured us both a glass of sweet tea from the pitcher on his desk. It was the kind he always made strong with just enough sugar to coat the bitterness. He handed me a glass and said, "You've been working all your life for that home. Don't let guilt trick you into giving it up." I stared at the condensation rolling down the side of the glass, then took a slow sip. "He's my boy," I said finally. "My only one." "And you're his father," Jefferson replied. "That still means something even when they forget it. But there's a difference between forgiveness and foolishness." His words carried the kind of weight that only comes from truth spoken without pity. He pushed the papers back toward me. "You got two choices now," he said. "You can teach him what respect looks like, or you can let him rewrite what you built. One honors your wife's memory, the other buries it." I sat there staring at the folder. The church bells outside started to ring, the hour slow and heavy, the sound rolling through the thin walls. I remembered how Lena used to close her eyes whenever those bells rang, whispering a prayer for the people in our neighborhood, the ones struggling, the ones lost, the ones who needed strength. Maybe she was praying for me too, even now. "I won't bury it," I said quietly. "Not after what she gave." Jefferson nodded. "Then you stand tall. You handle this your way, but handle it clean. Don't let anger cloud your judgment. Men like us, we win by keeping our peace." I looked around the small office walls lined with family photos, certificates, church flyers from past community drives. There was a picture of Jefferson shaking hands with a young man in a graduation gown. His son, no doubt. That same pride I once felt for Marcus flickered in his eyes. It hurt to see it, but it also reminded me that some men still raise their children right. "Thank you," I said, standing up. "You don't know how much this means." He rose too, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "Yes, I do. You're not the first to walk in here betrayed by blood. But you might be the first to walk out calm enough to do something about it." We walked out together, the sunlight cutting through the clouds, as if the heavens had been waiting for the right moment to open. Outside, the smell of rain still lingered, mixing with the faint scent of magnolias from the church garden. "Take your time," Jefferson said as I reached my truck. "Patience is a weapon too. Remember that." I nodded and climbed in. For the first time in days, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. The road ahead was long, but I could see it clearly now. The world might have changed, but the law still respected ink and truth. And I had both. On the drive home, the radio played a blues song I hadn't heard in years. Soft guitar, weary voice lyrics about loss turning into power. I tapped the steering wheel in rhythm, feeling the music settle in my chest. The kind of song that reminds you where you come from, that no matter how hard life hits, you're still standing. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky had turned gold. I parked the truck and sat for a moment looking at the house. The light hit the front porch just right, glinting off the brass mailbox Lena insisted on buying even when we couldn't afford it. I remembered her saying, "If you want people to respect your home, make it shine." I got out my shoes, crunching on the gravel. Every step toward that door felt like reclaiming something I didn't even know I'd lost. I wasn't just defending a house, I was defending the years, the sacrifices, the love carved into its bones. Inside, I set the folder back on the desk and poured myself another glass of tea. I sat in the same chair where I'd read Lena's letters and held Marcus as a baby back when the world still felt simple. But now, simplicity was gone. In its place stood clarity. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal anymore. I felt something purer, something that hummed just beneath the skin, justice, patience, purpose. I would move carefully, quietly. Marcus wouldn't see it coming. The sun dipped lower, washing the room in amber light. I could hear the faint sounds of the neighborhood children laughing, a car starting, a dog barking somewhere down the street. Life kept moving, and so would I. I leaned back in the chair, the taste of sweet tea still on my tongue, and smiled faintly. The law was on my side. The truth was on my side. And for the first time since that phone call, I felt powerful again. And the next thing I did would make sure no one ever mistook my silence for surrender again. The next morning I woke before dawn. The sky outside was still bruised with night, and the air carried that stillness you only hear before a big decision. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the deed laid flat in front of me, the ink of my name dark and certain. It was strange how something so small, a few words on paper, could hold the weight of an entire life. My son thought I was old, soft, easy to move around like a pawn. But what he didn't know was that I'd been playing the long game my whole life. You don't survive decades of hard work and loss without learning patience and precision. I took a pen from the drawer and began writing down numbers. Mortgage values, savings, the current market price of houses in the area. My handwriting was slow but steady. I'd built houses once, and now I was about to dismantle one brick by brick in the most deliberate way a man could. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was messy, noisy. What I felt was cleaner, focused. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. By 8 a.m. I was dressed in my best shirt, the same one I wore to church on Easter. I drove down to the south side of town to a small office squeezed between a barber shop and a dry cleaner. A worn wooden sign above the door read, Brooks Realty. I hadn't been here in years, but I remembered Deshaun Brooks well. We'd gone to the same church back when he was a teenager, sharp kid, quiet eyes, good manners. His mother sang in the choir with Lena, and when he opened his business, I helped him fix the drywall in his first office. He looked up from his desk when I walked in, surprise spreading into a grin. Mr. Harris, Lord, it's been too long. How you been better now? I said, shaking his hand. I need your help, son, and I need it quiet. That caught his attention. He gestured to the chair across from him. Whatever you need, sir. I sat down and laid the folder on the desk between us. I'm looking to sell my house. No signs, no open houses, no noise. Just a private buyer. Somebody solid who won't drag things through the mud. He nodded slowly, flipping through the paperwork. You sure about this? That place has been yours forever, I'm sure. My voice was calm, almost too calm. You think you can find someone willing to pay $890? Deshaun whistled softly. That's high for the neighborhood, but it's fair for the condition it's in. With your location, I could get that, maybe even more. I'll reach out to a few people I trust. Good, I said, leaning back. I'll give you 2 weeks. After that, I want it done. He gave me a look, half respect, half curiosity, but didn't ask questions. You got it, Mr. Harris. I'll make the calls today. We spent another hour going over the details. He was thorough, professional, and discreet, the kind of man who understood the power of silence. By the time I walked out, the sun had broken through the clouds, spreading light across the wet pavement. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the morning air. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was steering my own ship again. Back home, I started clearing out the things that didn't matter anymore. Old tools, boxes of clothes, paperwork from years long gone. I worked slow, deliberate, methodical, just like when I used to frame houses. Every item I kept, every drawer I emptied felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I didn't rush it. Each move had purpose. This wasn't just packing, it was preparation. By evening, I'd filled 3 boxes with Lena's keepsakes, her church hat, her silver locket, a stack of recipes written in her careful script. I wrapped them gently the way she used to fold my shirts before Sunday service. Those would come with me. Everything else could stay or burn. The phone rang late that night. It was Deshaun. "Got a buyer," he said. "Private investor, quiet guy. Wants to move fast cash offer. He's ready to sign as soon as you are." My pulse quickened, but my voice stayed steady. "Set it up." 2 days later, I met the buyer in Deshaun's office. A man in his 50s with a clean suit, firm handshake, and the kind of polite detachment that made business smooth. We didn't talk much. He asked about the property, I answered simply, and within 30 minutes the papers were signed. I watched him slide the final form across the desk, watched my pen move across the page, steady, deliberate final. My signature looked the same as it had 35 years ago. Only my understanding of its power had changed. When it was done, Deshaun slid me the envelope with the wire confirmation. "It's all there," he said. $890,000 clean and clear. I looked at him then, at the papers stacked neatly between us. "You did good, son. Keep your faith and keep your business quiet. That's how a man stays standing." He grinned. "Always, sir. Anything else you need?" "Not yet," I said, "but soon." Driving home, I passed the familiar landmarks, the corner store where Lena used to buy her sweet tea, the park where Marcus played as a boy, the row of magnolia trees lining the churchyard. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. The city kept breathing, moving forward, unaware that something irreversible had just happened. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked peaceful, bathed in the last gold light of sunset. I sat in the car for a long time, watching the curtains sway gently through the open window. Somewhere a lawnmower hummed. Somewhere a child laughed. It was the kind of evening that used to make Lena say, "This world may break you, but it still gives you sunsets." I stepped inside and poured myself a glass of whiskey, not for celebration but for reflection. The house smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old memories. I raised the glass to the empty room. "You did good, baby," I whispered. "You told me not to let anyone take what we built. And I didn't." I sat down in her chair and stared at the deed lying on the coffee table, now stamped and sealed, the ink still fresh. My name was still there, but soon it would be gone, replaced by someone else's. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt right, like closing the final chapter of a long book you've already memorized. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, shaking the porch swing. I leaned back and let it wash over me, that deep, grounding quiet that follows a decision made from strength instead of fear. Marcus thought he was playing chess, moving me like a tired old piece. But he never realized I was the one setting the board. I took another slow sip and smiled. Everything was in motion now, smooth and silent. The sale was done. The money was safe. And when they came back to claim what they thought was theirs, they'd find nothing left but dust echoes and the memory of a man who refused to be erased. And what happened when they finally did return, that was the part no one saw coming. The morning I left that house, the sky was clear and sharp, like the world was watching. I'd packed the last of my things the night before, Lena's picture wrapped in her favorite scarf, a small Bible she used to keep by the bed, and a single glass from our wedding set. Everything else stayed behind. I wasn't running. I was closing a chapter. But before I walked out for the last time, I had one final thing to do. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and rain-soaked wood. I walked slow, deliberate, my footsteps echoing through rooms that had once been full of life. The kitchen table still bore a faint ring from Lena's coffee mug, the one she used every morning for 20 years. I ran my hand over it, then reached for the small black camera sitting on the counter. It wasn't much, just a tiny thing I'd bought at the hardware store downtown. The clerk had asked if I wanted it for home security. I just smiled and said, "Something like that." I set it high in the corner of the living room, angled toward the front door. It blinked once, red light steady. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to know that the house they'd schemed over was watching them back. The camera wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about showing what people look like when greed meets reality. On the coffee table sat a yellow notepad. I tore off a sheet and pulled the pen from my jacket pocket. My handwriting was slower now, but still firm. I wrote, "You called me a burden. I call this justice. The house is sold. The money safe. May you learn what real work and respect mean." I stared at the words for a long moment before folding the paper in half. My hand didn't shake not once. I walked to the front door, taped the note right above the handle, and stepped back to look at it. The morning sun caught the edges, lighting it up like a quiet sermon. The trap wasn't made of malice or spite. It was made of truth. And truth, I've learned, doesn't need to shout. It just waits. I moved through each room one last time. The living room where Marcus took his first steps, wobbling from Lena's arms to mine. The hallway where we'd hung his school photos every year, a little taller, a little prouder. The bedroom where Lena would hum softly at night, singing "His Eye is on the Sparrow" until I drifted off. I could almost hear her now, her voice mixing with the low hum of the morning. I opened the window and let the fresh air in. The breeze carried the smell of magnolia and the faint buzz of distant lawnmowers. Life was still happening outside these walls, and I was finally ready to rejoin it. For too long, I'd been buried under guilt and habit, mistaking endurance for love. But love isn't about staying in places that stop recognizing you. It's about knowing when to stand, when to walk, and when to teach the lesson no one else will. I walked outside and stood on the porch. The neighborhood was quiet except for a few kids riding bikes down the block, their laughter echoing between houses. I remembered Marcus at that age, carefree, wild, running barefoot through sprinklers. I'd given him everything so he'd never have to struggle the way I did. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe ease had softened him where struggle should have shaped him. But I couldn't undo it now. I could only correct it the way life always corrects the ungrateful, with consequence. I locked the front door for the last time, the click sharp and final. I stood there a moment longer, staring at the house bathed in sunlight. It looked peaceful, almost holy. I imagined the moment they'd return, the sound of the key turning, the door refusing to open, Tanya's shrill confusion, Marcus's frustration boiling into panic. Then their eyes catching that note, the slow dawning of what they'd lost. Not just a house, but the safety net they thought they'd always have. I pictured Marcus reading my words out loud, his voice cracking on the word justice. I didn't want to hurt him. I wanted him to understand. I wanted him to feel the weight of responsibility, the kind his mother and I carried all our lives. Maybe he'd finally learn what it means to build something instead of inheriting it. I walked to the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. My hands were steady on the wheel as I pulled away. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, framed by sunlight and memory. I didn't feel sadness, not the kind that breaks you anyway. What I felt was a quiet kind of peace, the kind that comes when you've done what needed to be done. Halfway down the street, I passed Mrs. Coleman, watering her roses. She waved, and I rolled down the window. "Morning, Mrs. C," I said. She smiled, eyes kind but curious. "You headin' somewhere, Mr. Harris?" "Yeah," I said, "starting fresh." "Well, wherever you go, the Lord goes with you." I nodded. He always does. As I drove toward the edge of town, gospel music drifted from the radio, a familiar hymn, the same one Lena used to sing when she cooked Sunday dinner. I hummed along quietly, my voice low but sure. The road stretched wide and open ahead, the city skyline a faint shimmer in the distance. Every mile between me and that house felt like a breath drawn deeper. I thought about what would happen in a few days, when Marcus realized the sale was done, when he saw the locks changed, when he tried to piece together how his father, the man he thought was fading, had moved faster than him. Maybe he'd be angry. Maybe he'd be ashamed. But someday, years from now, when life had humbled him enough, I hoped he'd look back and understand. I wasn't punishing him. I was freeing him. Sometimes a lesson needs to sting to stick. The highway opened before me, sunlight glinting off the hood, wind humming through the crack in the window. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, and for the first time in years I felt truly alive, unburdened, unafraid, unowned. And what came after that drive would prove that peace, when earned through justice, has its own kind of power. 3 days later, my phone buzzed just after noon. I was sitting by the window in my new place, a small apartment that overlooked the churchyard. The sunlight spilled through lace curtains warm on my face. I'd just finished my coffee when the notification popped up on the screen, motion detected front door camera. I set the cup down slowly and tapped the feed. The screen flickered, then came to life. And there they were, Marcus and Tanya standing in front of the house like strangers who'd wandered onto sacred ground. My son wore his usual arrogance, like a suit too tight for him, straight-backed, pretending calm. Tanya, in her designer sunglasses and impatient stance, crossed her arms like she owned the place. I turned up the volume. "Try your key," she said, her voice sharp, too loud for the quiet street. He did. The key rattled, twisted, then stopped short. He frowned, tried again. Nothing. The lock was new, clean brass that glinted under the sun. "Maybe it's jammed," she muttered, already irritated. "It's not jammed," he snapped. He must have changed it. He stepped back, looking around, confused but not yet afraid. Tanya leaned in close to the door, and that's when she saw the note. Her hand hesitated in midair before she pulled it free and unfolded it. I could see her lips moving as she read, her face tightening with each line. Then came the silence. That kind of silence you only hear when the world tilts sideways. She turned slowly, her voice trembling now, but still coated in venom. "He sold it. Marcus, he sold the house." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "No, that's impossible. He wouldn't, he couldn't, he doesn't even know how to." "He knew enough." She cut him off. "And he did it without telling you." I sat back, watching through the small screen, my reflection faint in the glass behind it. I didn't smile, but something inside me loosened, a deep, heavy knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, pacing the porch. "We can fix this," he said. "We'll talk to the realtor, find out what happened, and say what Tanya snapped, that we plan to sell it behind his back. That's not fixing it. That's confessing." Her voice broke on the last word. I could see the panic rising in her face, the tremor of a woman who just realized the ground beneath her wasn't hers to stand on. Marcus stepped closer, pointing a finger at her. "You were the one who pushed this. You said we needed the money, that he'd be fine in some care home." "Don't you dare put this on me," she shot back. "He's your father. You're supposed to handle him, not me." Their argument spilled into the yard like wildfire, raw and loud and desperate. The neighbors peeked through curtains. One of the Johnson boys paused his bike at the corner, watching. Every word between Marcus and Tanya felt like a hammer striking the coffin of whatever they once had. "You said he was losing it," she hissed. "You said he wouldn't even notice if we started the paperwork." Marcus's face twisted. "And you said we'd be rich by summer." "Now we've got nothing." "Nothing," she shouted. "You mean I've got nothing? You've still got your job, your name. I left everything for you." Her voice cracked, tears streaking her mascara. For a moment neither spoke. Then she threw the note at his chest. "You think this is justice? This is humiliation. Everyone will know." Marcus caught the paper, stared at it, then ripped it in half. The sound was sharp, final. He turned toward the door and slammed his fist against it. "Dad, you hear me," he yelled. "You can't do this. You can't just—" But the door stayed silent, just as I'd planned. From where I sat, the screen showed the sunlight bouncing off the brass lock, bright and unforgiving. I could almost feel Lena beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine the way she used to when I got too riled up. "Let them learn," she'd whisper. "Some lessons don't come gentle." Tanya backed away from the porch, shaking her head. "I'm done, Marcus. I can't live like this. Your father's made a fool out of us, and I won't stick around for the encore." She stormed down the steps, her heels clacking against the concrete. Marcus followed after her, shouting, begging, but she didn't look back. The camera caught everything. The broken note fluttering on the porch, the door still standing tall. The man who'd tried to take what wasn't his, left staring at a house that no longer belonged to him. I let the video play until the screen dimmed. The sound of their argument still echoed faintly in my ears, but I didn't replay it. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the small balcony of my apartment. From there I could see the church steeple rising above the trees, its cross catching the afternoon light. The wind carried faint music, someone down the block playing an old gospel tune slow and low. I closed my eyes, breathing it in. For years I'd carried the weight of that family, believing love meant sacrifice without limit. But real love, I'd learned, comes with boundaries. The kind that protect what's sacred. I hadn't destroyed my son. I'd revealed him to himself, to the world. That was the real justice. I picked up my phone again, saving the footage to the cloud. Maybe one day I'd show it to him when the pride burned out and the lesson finally sank in. But not now. Right now, I wanted peace. As the sun began to set, I poured a glass of sweet tea and sat by the window. The light painted the walls gold the way it used to in the old house. Only this time it wasn't heavy with memories. It felt like promise, like clarity. They say God doesn't sleep, and I believe that. He just takes his time. Sometimes his justice comes softly, through patience, through silence, through a steady hand signing one last document. I took a slow sip and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes after surviving a long storm. The camera feed went dark as the motion stopped, leaving nothing but the still image of that locked door and the torn note at its base. Somewhere out there, Marcus was realizing what he'd lost, not just a house, but a legacy. And I knew deep down that the silence waiting for him was louder than any sermon I could have preached. But what came next, even I didn't see coming. The day after the dust settled, the morning light came through my window, soft and clean. The kind of light that doesn't demand anything from you. It just arrives. I sat at my small kitchen table in my new place, a quiet apartment with walls that still smelled faintly of new paint. From the church next door came the low hum of the choir, warming up, the sound rising like the slow opening of a sunrise. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, thick with sugar the way Lena used to make it, and let the chill from the glass sit against my palm. The sweetness hit my tongue, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't taste like memory. It tasted like peace. Lena's picture stood on the table in its old wooden frame, the same one she picked up from the thrift store downtown, insisting it had soul. The edges were worn, the glass a little cloudy, but her smile cut through it all the same. That look she had, it wasn't joy exactly, more like quiet assurance, the kind that made you believe she already knew how the story would end. I looked at her and whispered, "We did right, baby. Justice served." The words didn't carry anger. They didn't need to. Justice doesn't shout. It just stands steady, like a man who's seen too much to be rattled anymore. I turned the phone over on the table, the screen still dark from the last video I'd watched. I didn't need to see it again. The note on that door, the look on Marcus's face, Tanya's sharp words cutting into him, all of it had already settled into history. There was no triumph in it, just truth. For a long time, I'd believed that age made a man invisible, that you could live a life of work and sacrifice only to fade into the background, waiting for the world to forget you. But sitting there in that morning light, I realized I hadn't faded at all. I'd simply grown still enough to see things clearly. I wasn't powerless. I was patient. There's a difference. The apartment was small, but it was mine. The furniture was second-hand, the floors a little uneven, but it felt honest. The neighbors had already introduced themselves, Ms. Ruby from down the hall, who made peach cobbler every Sunday, Mr. Clark, who played dominoes by the window and called everyone young blood, no matter their age. People greeted each other here. They said grace before eating. They shared stories that sounded like mine. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone. Outside, the choir had begun their rehearsal in full, the harmonies rolling through the air like a tide. They were singing "His Eye is on the Sparrow," Lena's song. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, letting the melody fill the space. I could almost hear her humming along, tapping the table with her fingers like she always did when the beat caught her. Why should I feel discouraged? The soloist sang, her voice trembling and strong all at once. Why should the shadows come? That was the moment the tears came, not from sadness but release. Everything I'd carried, the betrayal, the disappointment, the years of being overlooked, it all lifted slow and gentle like smoke curling toward the ceiling. I realized that what I'd done wasn't revenge. It was correction. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply set the balance right. Marcus would have to learn his lessons the hard way. Maybe one day he'd come knocking, not for money, not for help, but for understanding. And when that day came, I'd be ready. Not with judgment, but with patience. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't weakness. It's choosing not to let bitterness take what's left of your spirit. I got up and walked to the window. From here I could see the church steeple rising over the rooftops, its cross gleaming gold in the sunlight. The choir's voices drifted through the open window, soft but sure. Down below, life carried on, kids racing their bikes, the smell of someone frying bacon, the rhythm of a neighborhood that still believed in Sunday morning peace. I thought about Lena again, how she used to remind me that everything has its season. You can't rush the Lord, she'd say, and you can't outsmart him either. Just walk your path and keep your hands clean. I smiled. She was right. She always had been. I picked up her picture and set it by the window so she could see the sunlight. You'd like it here, I said quietly. The choir's good, the tea's sweet, and the neighbors mind their business. I sat back down and took another sip of tea. The ice had melted, but I didn't mind. Outside, a light breeze rattled the blinds. For a moment, I just sat in it, the calm, the warmth, the quiet rhythm of the day. I wasn't angry at Marcus anymore. He was still my son, flesh of my flesh, even if he'd forgotten what that meant for a while. Maybe one day he'd come back different, older, humbled, ready to talk. And when he did, he'd find a father who hadn't turned to bitterness, just a man who'd learned that dignity is a stronger inheritance than money ever could be. The phone buzzed again. Another notification from the front door camera. I looked at it for a moment, then pressed and held the button until the feed went black. Some things don't need watching anymore. The afternoon light began to shift, gold fading into amber. The choir hit their final note, a long, soul-deep sound that vibrated in the chest more than the ears. I sat there until it faded completely, the silence after the song feeling almost sacred. I thought about everything Lena and I had built, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, and how even now it was still standing, not in wood and mortar, but in the lessons carved into my son's life. He might not see it yet, but one day he would. I reached for the Bible on the counter and opened it to the page Lena had bookmarked years ago, the one she read when things got heavy. Be still and know that I am God. The words settled deep in me. I wasn't restless anymore. I wasn't angry. I was still. Outside, the sun dipped behind the church steeple, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. The last of the day's light touched Lena's picture, glinting off the glass. It looked almost like she was glowing. I raised my glass one last time. We did right, baby, I said, my voice steady. Justice served. Then I took a slow sip, leaned back in my chair, and watched as the first evening stars began to appear one by one. And somewhere in that quiet, I could swear I heard her laugh again, light, soft, and full of peace. As we grow older, life teaches us that strength isn't always about fighting louder. It's about standing taller in silence. This story reminds us that dignity and self-respect never retire, no matter how many years pass. Sometimes love requires distance, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing your heart from bitterness. The Father's calm justice showed that wisdom earned over a lifetime can still set things right, even when others take it for weakness. It's a reminder to every older soul, your worth doesn't fade because others fail to see it. You've built, sacrificed, and endured, and that legacy can't be sold or stolen. Hold on to your principles, keep your faith steady, and let time prove what words cannot. True justice doesn't rush. It arrives quietly, bringing peace to those who've waited with grace. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand your ground with quiet strength? Subscribe for more stories that honor wisdom, resilience, and the power of age to teach what youth can't.